Well, good morning, Ray.
Good morning, Wally. Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again. Ray, I just wanted to let the people know that I've been reading, I've read all of your books, but I've read the discussions for effective leadership most recently, the second time, but I've read it more carefully. And I was just amazed at its practicality and application and the way you had set that book up. And uh, a group of sharks that went out for coffee here in Calgary. I brought the book with me and I leafed through a few pages, and we came upon one of the pages with a Henry David Thoreau quote in it, and it caught their eye. And the one gentleman who is the manager of the Calgary Canucks here in town, he wrote down the quote, and I got him to stand up, and we took a picture of him with the book. So, uh, Ray, can you just tell me a little bit? The book was written a number of years ago, but I'd like you to just tell me about that book in particular, the model you used, and how you came about completing it, and what you hope to get across from it. Go ahead, Ray.
The idea was ignited by the work I was doing with both Marcel, the co-writer, Marcel Bellefueille, and Bruno Lindia.
Can you
Uh, it-
explain who they are, please?
yes, I'm going to do that right now. Uh, since 2004, I was working with Bruno, who was the CEO of his own company, DMA Canada. And the reason I got involved with Bruno was because Marcel, who had been coach of the Ottawa GGs, and I had worked with him, and we had created some outstanding results, culminating in 2000 in the Vanier Cup Championship in football. And Marcel moved from there. It was like a launching pad into the pros. And into the pros, of course, he knew of my work. So he kind of asked me to once in a while provide insight and even coaching to some of his coaches and players. So in 2004, he was with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. And one of the players that really lost his confidence was Corey Grant in a final game uh, the year before, where he dropped a pass in the end zone, which would have allowed Saskatchewan to win the Grey Cup or at least get to the Grey Cup. So he asked me to work with him during the wintertime to build back his confidence. Of course, based on the knowledge that he had that I could help athletes really get aligned on their capabilities and use their abilities to the max. When I went to, and Marcel was talking to Bruno in the meantime because they are friends from here in Ottawa, and he was telling him about me. So when I went to Saskatchewan to work with the team that year in 2004, Bruno came from Calgary and spent the day watching, observing, participating in what I was doing, and he latched on to the concept of the right stuff in the right amount at the right time right away. So not only did I have now a incubator in sports because I continued to work with Marcel, who went on to work with the Alouettes and the Tiger Cats, but Bruno now had latched on to that concept and really believed in what I was discussing and doing. So he hired me as a coach for his company. And through that work, we became convinced that at one point in time that we should write something for the ages, I guess is the word, but something that kind of reflected our learning and our actual experience in applying these concepts. And it took a bit of time. Like I wrote my book, Aim for Life Mastery, published it in 2011, which further enhanced the credibility and the belief in what we were doing. So the decision was made that they wanted to write a book with me. So we set up, we had quite a few discussions and exchanges, and we selected, brainstorm brought out, many aspects of leadership. But through a selection method that we established, we came up with those 10 discussions as the most important ones that we thought should be shared with somebody reading the book. Because one of the main reasons, of course, I've been, studying leadership for 20 plus years at that time and doing it, coaching coaches. But the idea was that there are many things that are not particularly treated well or even mentioned in a lot of leadership books that exist. So it was meant to open the door on a few concepts that are not specifically addressed in most leadership books. And that's how we came with the 10 discussions. I don't hear you.
Here.
Yes.
For the benefit of the listeners, I've got the table of contents in front of me, and I think that the topics are amazing. And it's really funny because when I first met you and worked with you many years ago.
Why don't we kind of tell people how that happened?
Well, you had me come in to mentor at the University of Ottawa to work with a female hockey coach, and then eventually both the female and male hockey coaches. And in the course of that time, we established quite a relationship. And actually, I think before this particular book, you had written the AIM book on mastery. And I think we do want to talk about that a little bit later. But right now, because we're featuring this book, the thing about the mastery book that's, I think, the most brilliant takeaway is you coming up with the idea of the right stuff, the right amount, the right time. And, I think that's the first chapter in the table of contents here of your 10 topics. The right stuff is the first chapter.
Yep.
The second, the myth of empowerment. The third, trust in the boomerang theory. Fourth, telling the truth. And I'm not going to go through them all, but the titles themselves are just sort of hypnotically attractive. Optimize results with joint planning, lead by example, clarity of vision, asking constructive questions. And that's something that I think coaches have learned to do over the years, is to go from yelling and telling to learning to coach like Socrates and ask questions to get them engaged. And the last chapter, alone at the top, well, from a coaching point of view, you might go from the top to the bottom if you don't win. So that's pretty well it in professional sports anyway. And the same is true for amateur coaches. And I'm not sure how true it is in the business world in terms of the turnover at the top. They may have to be able to control their environment and maintain their jobs, but um, anyway, those topics generally that you, Bruno, and Marcel have come up with, um, they had much more meaning to me reading them this year, 2024, than when I first read the book, because I didn't really sit down and absorb it. I'm retired. I had time to read, digest, absorb, reflect. And I think that that's one of the problems with people out there. They're just so busy. They get a book, and I'm looking at probably buying this book and the AIM book and giving it to coaches to pass on to others once they read it. Sort of a pay it forward philosophy, because for me, the biggest and simplest chapter of all, which started with your aim for mastery, was the ability of a leader or a coach to do the right stuff, the right amount, the right time. And the friend, as my friend, our friend, Tim Bothwell said, and do it the right way. So I'm just going to leave that with you, Bruno, if you want to talk a bit about the book and get into the theory of even the aim for mastery, because it is a thread. To me, it's sort of the practical tool of how you deliver on what you know to the audience you're working with, to your team, to your staff. Go ahead. I'll leave that with you, Ray.
It's not a coincidence that the first chapter of this leadership book addresses the concept of peak performance, which is the right stuff in the right amount at the right time. Both Marcel and Bruno were at that time, we wrote the book in 2012, were involved with organizations that, it's a dynamic context. Things change like by the hour. And one of the things that, as a coach, a performance coach, that I found, it's so true what you're saying, that we're so busy with what's going on that we forget to do the little things that make the big difference. And as I work with both as a coach to coaches, we addressed a lot of these concepts that we have raised in the book and saw in action the impact that it had on themselves and the teams that they were leading, and where, success, at least in sports, is almost immediate when you do the right thing. And, defeat or, unwanted results is the same way. It happens like in a flash. If a sports coach, does something that breaks the harmony or the essence of the team. And I can relate here an example that I was part to in 1993. I was with the Quebec Nordiques, and they were in the quarterfinal with Montreal, and they were leading 2-1. The fourth game was in Montreal, and they lost that game in overtime. And as soon as the game was over, I got a call from Pierre Paget. He says, come on down to Montreal. He says, I need you. We were talking about, essentially some of this stuff that's in this book. So Pierre thought that, I should help him with the coaching staff to straighten out the situation. So it was 11:30 at night. I drove out to Montreal, and I spent a good part of the night with the coaches. Jacques Martin was one of them. And we went over a few things that, they were in bad need of correcting. However, the damage had been done. And I recount that story to illustrate when one thing can push over the whole apple cart. And there was something going on between Pierre and Matt Sundin. And it was the end of the story. They lost the next 2 games, and the Nordiques were one of the best teams ever on the road that year. And they were, like, I kind of call it, shoe-ins to be on the cup. They had the team, and yet they didn't make it because something happened in the dressing room. And I saw it again in 2003, I think, in Montreal, where I was working with some of the players, and something went on between the second and third period against Carolina. And José Theodore, who was the goalie, after that, couldn't stop a beach ball, and Montreal lost the series. So coming back to the question of how did we put together this book, it was a concerted effort to touch on issues or themes, that really make a difference. And it's almost intangible. You don't pay attention to these 10 subjects that you kind of addressed or mentioned in the table of content. And what happens is that in sports, the result is very, very fast. But in business, and that's what we were aiming for, is to help business people be more proactive in guiding their team in a way that they prevented some of the major failings that happen over time if you don't respect some of these activities or actions that a leader should maintain. So
I'm sorry, I need to interrupt you. I've got a thinking process going on in my mind because I'm in the actual world of mentorship, which to me is sort of like a mysterious word. And I have a practical example here of the right stuff and the wrong amount in the wrong time. And it's a simple, expectable fact. There are a lot of former players, parents that have played a lot of hockey that are now coaching their kids. And this is a U13 team. And I'm mentoring them. And they're doing good stuff, but it isn't the right stuff relative to teaching the fundamental basic tactical skills because they really don't have the toolbox to teach at that level. Now, when Pierre Pagé reached out to you, he had a relationship with you where he knew you well enough, trusted you, and respected you enough to call and ask for help when he lost. And it's almost like they have to fail before they ask for help. And I'm trying to help them succeed without interrupting them and bothering them to the point of not serving any purpose in helping them become better coaches or better leaders. And that's my challenge right now. And the thing that I've discovered is if I can establish and build a relationship of trust and respect, at some point they may come forward and ask for help. But until someone asks for help, it's almost impossible to help. Go ahead.
when you raise that point, right away my brain is triggered into chapter 4. I think it's chapter 4. I'm going to check. No, chapter
Telling the truth.
no, chapter 3. Chapter 4 is important, but chapter 3, I think, is more important.
The myth of empowerment.
No, the trust. Number 3.
Yeah,
Number
trust
3.
in the boomerang theory.
Trust
Okay.
in boomerang theory. And I bring that one up, Wally, because you've just explained to me a dynamic that you have to deal with. That, like you don't want to impose, you don't want to interfere, but you can see the tremendous benefit that they would get from asking you. And I raised that number 3, trust is like the boomerang theory, is to encourage you to do just that one thing. You're an eminence when it comes to mentorship and coaching. We don't have to kind of search very far. You've had so much success. But the idea is that you want these people to develop a trust that you can help them. And I'm thinking if you focus on building that trust by, you don't get too many opportunities to have these people in a room and talk to them. So it would be before the season, probably, maybe around Christmas time. I don't know if you would have other opportunities. But 2 things. One is to have a conference, if I can use a term, where you can talk to them about trust and support that with a 1-pager. That's a reminder. Like suggest that they hang it into their coaching room. That helps them helps them to remember what trust is. And, it's described, it's talked about in the book. Integrity, intent, capability, and predictability. There are 4 things very important for people to develop trust. And so I always think in terms of you kind of being a model for them to develop trust, because I'm just thinking in terms of how the impact can be massive if people learn to trust you, but also demonstrate trust to their parents, co-parents, right? Because you talked about parents that are coaching young people, and develop trust in the kids towards the coach. And now you've got an environment. It's like an incubator where you can do the rest of the stuff that you know so well how to do. Sound.
The secret. What is the secret to building trust?
The first thing is you have to trust the other person. That's the first thing. That's why it's called the boomerang. It respects the boomerang theory. First of all, you have to trust them. And I know, Wally, because I'm in this business. I work with people that pay me big bucks to coach them. And the first thing I have to do is I have to trust that they will do what's necessary to go through that transformation that I offer them. The possibility of discovering the inner strengths and capabilities and abilities they have to be the best and to be the leaders that they aspire to be.
Thank you. That makes sense. I've simplified sort of what a coach and leader has to do and an organization needs to accomplish. And I said the 2 most important values are trust and respect. And a former mentor of mine who's no longer living, the lesson I got from him, the advice I got from him as a parent coaching his sons, winning a city championship at the U13 level. And I took over the team the next year, inheriting the best players in the city. But I was in fourth place in November. And I was frustrated. It was sort of like Pierre. He lost the game and he called you. Well, I called Ken Bracco, the dad coach. Ken, what did you do? I'm in fourth place. I've got the best players. And he explained to me what he did. And he said, well, he basically just demanded two things: effort and respect. And effort in sport, it's all work, but it's quality work, the right kind of work, the right amount of work at the right time, as you know.
Yep.
And he demanded effort from the players, and he demanded respect with one another, towards him, towards the officials. And I find when I work with an organization, trust and respect in the big organization I'm working for or have worked for, those elements aren't there. Trust and respect isn't authentically present and evident, but it's what we strive for. And I think reading your books, and this book in particular, was a wake up call and a reminder you never stop learning.
When you say never stop learning, I have this reflection. One of the things that happens, and you underlined it, is that people get too busy and do not uh, seek to expand their understanding, their knowledge. They just do. And what happens is, like I'm thinking back, you were just talking about trust and respect, and like the bywords, if you can use that. But I remember that was part of our way of doing things when we won the Vanier Cup. We didn't have the best players, the most outstanding stars, like the most complex systems, but we had a bunch of guys that believed in each other, trusted each other, respected each other, and wanted to play for each other. And that was an overwhelming strength that we had, that nobody could take us down. And I think I have told you the story of how we almost lost that Vanier Cup because something happened in the dressing room at halftime. And I was on the sideline and watching this, and we were up 35-10 at halftime, and we ended up winning 42-39. That kind of tells you what kind of second half we had. And that's including blocking a field goal in the fourth quarter and intercepting a pass in the end zone. All plays that could have torpedoed our game. And the reason why we did was that our leaders, not the coaches, our leaders, the 6 captains, decided that they were going to win the game. And I was on the sidelines. I was, at the bench. So I heard what was going on, that what was happening, they wouldn't let it end up in a defeat. And they went out and played their hearts out. And that's what happens when you establish an atmosphere of trust and respect between the players and, towards accomplishing the goal that has been set.
Ria, I wanted to share something from, and I haven't written a book, but it's something that I would add, and possibly you would be able to include in something, your future writing. Uh, the biggest roadblock is the score clock and winning. Uh, People lose sight of the process that it takes to win, and leadership is about sticking with the process. And winning is not the score clock, it's just being the best you can be, because you can't control that final outcome. In your perception, the leaders took over and affected the mood of the team. It wasn't the coaches, and that's a fair observation. But one thing I do at the beginning of the year and throughout every season, and reminding coaches coming to games, and I'm mentoring teams playing each other. I'm mentoring coaching staffs of opposing teams. And I remind them of their job, the value of their job. The purpose of it is not to win, but to make each other better, trying to win. And they're trying to make you better, the opponent, and you're trying to make them better. And there's no shame in losing. But there is if you don't learn from losing. And so
Yeah.
that's the aspect of keeping on learning from losing, but having a perspective of appreciating the actual job of a coach is to make the other coach better, and the players to make the other players better.
When you talk about this business of the scoreboard and winning, I'm sure you're familiar with John Wooten, who never spoke about winning with his players. He only talked about going out and doing your job and, striving to be the best you can be and applying, like you said, the process that we have determined makes best use of our skills and abilities. And lo and behold, he was the winningest college basketball coach in history. I don't hear you.
John Wooden and many other coaches who have been winning on a regular basis and extended basis, they they understand the purpose of their coaching. They're not focusing on I've got to win. They're focusing on the growth of the team and the values that you're developing in your group to be the best they can be, trying to win. And I think some people might interpret that, oh, gee, you're weak. This isn't elite. This isn't high performance. When in reality is the highest level of performance.
I
And
think that like I can't help but inject something here, Wally, because you've been at the summum of performance. You were in Salt Lake City and you saw what this context that we're talking about does to help a team. They went through the second period with 7 power plays by the States, and they still overcame because they believed in the necessity for them to be focused on what they could do, and to hell with the rest.
well, the reality of that situation was the people, the employees working behind the scenes. It was our sports psychologist who had prepared us for the possibility of having officiating that wasn't as good as it could be. And we had a list of 300 potential distractions that we had talked about and desensitized in our minds. And we came up with a refocusing word, should that happen at Salt Lake City. And it was used between periods as a reminder by one of the players to the teammates at the end of the period, where we had 7 penalties and we're up 1-0, and they were frustrated in the dressing room and they were swearing at the ref in the dressing room. And as I walked into the room, just trying to address this, one of the players stood on the bench and shouted Camp Engadine, which was our refocusing word that we had created 5 weeks before in a mountain resort where we had done that exercise of creating a list of distractions that might occur. And that's preparation, that's effort, that's the time that goes into sports preparation. And I'm sure in business, the same is true. You're not ready for every scenario, and you're going to be blindsided by them, but you have to imagine them, talk about them, and be able to cope with them when they do happen.
Yep. It's exactly what happens when you are proactive and you do what's called risk analysis. In business, any business that really succeeds does pay attention to risk and figures out ways of getting around the potential outcomes. And I guess that's what you've just illustrated with what happened in Salt Lake City. You don't wait for something to happen to fix it. You plan on ways to mitigate the impact. And, like I've done this too, what you just talked about, keywords that are, like I'm thinking of it with the GGs. We had win the war, win the war. And I'll tell you what that means. WIN, what's important now? And war is we are ready. And win the war was the cry, the battle cry. And we had integrated that, and the captains were, like the proponents and advocates of this concept. And it made a difference. It made a big difference. It kind of set us on a target that allowed us to win the big game. Can't hear you, can't hear you, can't hear you.
I appreciate the acronym WIN and WAR and each of those letters and what they mean.
I could show you they had, like I didn't know what we were going to talk about, but they had a T-shirt made for the moment. A T-shirt that said on the back, "Win the war," and of course it was the GG's logo in front. But everybody walked around with that T-shirt.
Yeah. It's a reminder, a constant reminder. I want to relate a story of Peter Cannell at the University of Calgary, and it relates to the idea of, gee, you're down, a touchdown was just scored, and normally panic can set in. And one of the routines that I'm sure their sports psychologist created for them was when this happened, watching a football game with the Dinos, they got scored on, and all the players, and they dress a lot of players that don't get into the action on the sideline, they they stand and they are sort of celebrating the goal or the fact that they got scored on. And where the free focusing word is reload, reload. And you can hear it from in the stands. But those are, they're pretty common sense.
Of
If you
course.
feel good, you're going to play better. You control how you feel, and you can mentally train yourself. It's part of leadership coaching with young people, with elite athletes, and with business people. Being able to refocus, get on with the task, don't let things distract you, and sort of keep your ducks in order as best you can.
I've got another story to tell you how massive the impact is in something like that. You know that Henry Burris was one of my coaching clients, right?
Yeah.
And I helped him to kind of create that bubble where when he crossed the sideline to go on the field, he became a different person. And I'm alluding to the work with the Aim for Life Mastery process when I talk about this. Help him develop that inner belief, like nothing could shake it, that when he went on the field, he was the boss. And I tell this story because of what you just said. If you forget, you just go back to where you were before. So you have to always be present with this new concept. What happened was that in 2016, I believe, I could be corrected on that. In 2016, they went to the Grey Cup against Edmonton. And they lost the game. And Henry was out of sorts, missing his receivers, not seeing them. It was painful to watch. The next year, they went to the Grey Cup again, but this time Henry was locked in. And he went 22 of 23 completions. And the one that was not completed, the guy dropped the ball. It was like night and day. And I knew before the game started, when they won the Grey Cup, that they would win it because he was locked in. He had learned his lesson about, like, well, that's nice stuff, but, like, I know how to do it and all that kind of stuff. And there's no letdown, huh? You've got to be present and mindful and intentional all the time to have peak performance.
Does a team or a coach or an athlete have to fail like Henry did before you can help them?
There are very few and far between athletes, we're talking about athletes, that can do it. And one that I observed is Sidney Crosby. Another one is Wayne Gretzky. Another one is Mario Lemieux. But, we're talking about, most outstanding players that, like day in and day out, you could count on them. But they're few and far between. You've got a whole bunch of, superstars that sometimes they're out of this world, and then sometimes they're just ordinary because they forget. They get distracted.
They beat themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, Ray, I want to ask you, the book that you're rewriting, a second edition, or is it a third?
Third edition.
Aim for Mastery. Uh, I wonder if you could talk a bit about, you've written the book 3 times. The original book, the second book, and now why the third book with the same title?
Oh, I'll tell you, 2011 is a long time ago. That's when it was published the first time. We're now in 2024, and I have learned so much. And like, it's your life too. You're kind of progressing. But the reason why, number one, I wanted to bring it up to current facts. But there was something more, is that with time, I've gotten, like working with so many different people in the area of coaching, I've refined some of the terminology. I've refined some of the approaches. I have, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. One of the things that I have discovered over the years, and it's common sense, but in my book this time there will be a Appendix 11, which contains what I call an accountability chart. I've been using this with athletes, with business people for ages, but it was called my weekly plan. But working, like it's amazing what you learn working with. I was working with young people last year, not athletes, just guys going to university, but their dad wanted me to work with them to help them, like elevate their game. And of course, I had them, start using the weekly plan. But through other readings and stuff like that, I thought that, like I'm like 30 years past the point where I read a book that said what gets rewarded gets done by Mike LeBeouf. And, like the connections happen that if we are accountable to ourselves, it tremendously increases the potential for being a peak performer. Being accountable to somebody else doesn't always produce the results because they're not there. And so you let down, you let up, and you don't always strive for effortless effectiveness, which is a concept that I have enhanced, refined, and is now being used in another book that somebody else has written. And the idea is that if you're accountable to yourself, then there's a better chance that you're going to do what you have to do. And accountability in this case is not about the big rocks. Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits, and he talks about, like the pot. I don't know if you've ever seen this video where he shows how if you put the sand first, then the small pebbles, then the little rocks, that you don't have room to put the big boulders on top. But if you start by putting the big rocks in the bowl and then adding the other ones reverse, like the gravel and then the little pebbles, then the sand, you can put everything in, there's still some room left. Meaning that we should take care of the important stuff first, the big rocks. However, one of the things that I discovered working with people is that it's the little things that make the biggest difference. And so something like the mental gym or neuro gym, I call it now, of doing your exercises daily, of breathing, of doing affirmation, of visualizing, of being grateful. If you kind of make sure that it's recorded in your accountability chart and you do it, you develop a habit. And that's the big deal. It's about developing a habit of performance. I can't hear you.
So this is going to be a theme of your third book?
You mean the Aim for Life Mastery?
Yes.
It's part of. I just illustrated things that are going to change in the book.
Yeah.
Like another thing that I have come up with is instructions on how to build a vision. And I've used an acronym that is, it's called Arabic. It kind of catches your ear because it almost sounds like Arabic, but it's Arabic, Erabbic, Arabic. And it's about E, explain, R is reflect, and reflect has to do with Appendix 10 in the book. Then appreciate, like one of the things that we are not good at is appreciate our successes. We kind of work like we're told, oh, it's your job. Why should we shower you with, celebration, whatnot? It's your job. Just do your job. And the idea is that we don't learn to celebrate our wins. So once you've done list of achievements in Appendix 10, the inventory, you appreciate, you kind of go over what you gain by going through these experiences and what it shows you how you are. Then brainstorm. The first B is brainstorm. Like do a brainstorm of what your future would look like if there was no barrier, if what you want in life would all be there, no obstacle, no barrier, no hindrance. And once you do that exercise, that brainstorm, then I don't know if you've ever heard of mind maps.
Yes.
So the second B is build your vision using a mind map. So you use the themes of all the stuff that you've identified as gains or desires, and you make a mind map around my vision of the future. Once you've done that mind map, I is for illustrate. And I don't know if you've read about this stuff, but people that teach developing a vision, they say take a board and find pictures and even like doctor them so that your face is in it, but make a picture board of where you want to be, because our subconscious brain works on images. It doesn't work on words. It works on images. And finally, the C is for celebrate. Talk about it, share it, so that other people that you are close to, not just anybody, but the people that you feel can help you get there, help them see your vision and celebrate it and help you get there. Arabic.
That's pretty interesting. The idea of images. Alan Andrews, who's usually on the Sharks, he has always talked about every player having a dream. But the perspective he wants is to make sure you have a dream after the dream.
Oh.
And he wants them to be prepared. And Crosby was one of his youthful clients, to be prepared for when it's done and life in general. So his programs deal with the kind of life skills that I think precede success that you need to be successful. But one of the things they do is they write down their ultimate dream goal, and they'll put pictures or write their goal, and they'll have it taped on the ceiling above their beds. These are kids.
I think the key is, and I encourage my clients to do that, is to put it where you don't necessarily look at it. It's just there so that your eyes can catch it on the way by. Because let's face it, our brain is like a computer, and we have no idea how many stimuli we capture in a day through our five senses. And we don't do it willingly. It just happens. And that's why, like doing this business that Al Andrews, as the kids do, is so powerful, is because, remember, practice. Oh, by the way, I have a new one as far as practice is concerned. What does practice do? I can't hear you. Can't hear.
Proper practice can accomplish great things. Without direction and purpose, practice can be counterproductive.
Yes. Well, I've got a very simple definition or saying around practice now. I didn't create it. comes from Dennis Waitley, an eminent psychologist in the States who has worked with astronauts, with Olympic athletes, with, like he's very well known. And he says, practice makes permanent. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
But that's what it does. Practice makes permanent.
Yeah. And that's why in my mentorship role, I like practice to be purposeful. And I observe coaches at every team overlook some of the details within the drill where they could intervene and should intervene because the purpose of that drill isn't being accomplished. So the habit isn't being developed that's going to translate into the playing field. And I'm involved in high performance and development one certification evaluations. And that's one of the first things I notice is coaches today just copy drills. They do drills, usually the same drills over and over, and they get good at them. They're comfortable with them. But at times, some of them run a drill and they forget about the details and they don't intervene and correct them and stop them. Good coaches will stop a drill, intervene, remind them of the purpose of it, usually by questioning, not by telling and yelling. And those coaches are the ones that are making the biggest difference in the long run of things.
There are three words that, like in business, but it's the same thing in sports, that I'm going to share with you right now. I've been talking about this for ages because that's where I started. In 1977, I started working on continuous improvement. And there are three words. The first one is uniform. Why uniform? What does that do? Well, it's exactly what you just talked about. If you don't do it the same way all the time, you confuse the brain. Because, and you can imagine, like you do a drill, and let's say there's something that's not taken care of, and the coach does not bring it up, then there's, we'll call mistakes or, like faulty practice or drill. And now some kind of fall into that mode and others kind of say, well, that's not the way it's done. And now there is something going on in the group that, if the coach does not stop and correct, you now have confusion in the actors. Consistent, uniform, consistent. Consistent meaning that once you've established a pattern, you always apply it. Good day, bad day, like hungry, whatever. Consistent. And now I'm talking also, as far as the coach is concerned, you're talking about stopping the drill and asking the players. That should be consistent. It should always be the way, as opposed to yelling or, like blowing the whistle and say, like, come on, guys, or whatever. It should always be done the same way. And then the third thing is repeatable. And that's probably the most important one, because if you ask them to do something that's difficult, it'll be hard to repeat. So uniform, consistent, repeatable is paramount in ensuring peak performance. Can't hear you.
I'd like to tie a bow to our session um, you're talking about up, ways of improving the process of getting better, and uh, the languaging is unique. It's catchy. It's hypnotic, and it's going to make people more conscious and aware to be more attentive to the details to develop good habits. But uh, you work in business and sports. My primary focus is sports. Like, I really believe the outcome is so unimportant. What really matters is the process and the value of just playing a sport and doing things the right way. And that's a coach's job. And at times, organizations might think, well, you're not winning, it doesn't matter. And they might change coaches more than they should. But in minor sports, I find the focus really is on the life skills. And it's the life skill of staying focused in the zone at all times and paying attention to details, doing things right, the right way, technically, ethically, and effortly, to the point that it's natural. It's a part of who we become in life.
I think
So life,
there's a reality that we must keep in mind. I'm thinking in terms of minor sports. Coaching young athletes is a job. It's a hard job. And those who take it on, number one, they have to commit to do the work, to make it fun and uh, helps kids grow and create an environment where, like you just talked about, life skills, they learn to play together. That's life. What I'll add is that for coaches, and you work with them, it is important that they be single-minded, if I can use a term. And by that expression, I'm thinking of your bywords with the Sharks. It's for the good of the game. And coaches require and benefit from being reminded that what they're doing is for the good of the game, because an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 13-year-old, like, there's no money riding on it. What is riding on it is the kid having fun. And I'm not as familiar, because I've gotten away from minor hockey for quite a while, but I'm quite familiar with what's happening in soccer, because I have grandkids that are playing soccer. And I'm seeing the coaches, and even the kids are saying when it's not fun, they don't want to go to practice, because they're not, like all of these things that we've talked about: respect, trust, compassion, relationships with the parents, with the kids. All of those things play into fun or something that I don't care to be participating in. And when everything is said and done, and I'm looking at you as a mentor for those coaches, is helping them develop that belief that their participation, I'm talking about the parents that coach, is to make an environment where the kids love to be, like to play with the other kids, and, like, at the same time, learn life skills. And when that is the focus, then of course the scoreboard kind of becomes secondary.
Yeah, the scoreboard, it's sort of the final result of the test. And I think that's why John Wooden, Claire Drake, and so many other great coaches who have won consecutive championships or numerous championships have based it on a philosophy and a culture of respect and trust and doing things the right way. And they've managed to reinforce that. That's in their DNA.
It's it's uncanny for me to kind of, we're wrapping up, but where we're going is the empowerment theme. You know, like whatever happens, whatever you do, whatever is decided, it should be in the context of empowering those who do, like the players in sports, empowering them to be the best they can be.
Well, Ray, I want to thank you for your time. We'll have to do it again and look forward to your next book. I wonder if you could, if you have copies of the books, take a picture of them with your phone and send them to me. When I do some editing and trying to promote this particular podcast, I like to show those books up and remind people how they can access them on Google or Amazon or whatever.
I'll do better than that. I'll send you the covers of the
That'll be
books,
good. That'll be great.
because I've got, you know, like they've been published, so I have the covers for these books.
Send me the covers of each one, and we'll make.
Then
We'll
you
make
can do
do with.
whatever you want with them.
Okay. Now, Ray, I'm going to send you a copy of this podcast, and I'd like you to test it in terms of the volume. I believe that you may have to have a speaker to hear it, but I'm going to call you back later today. Just listen to a bit of it to see if it's listenable. I know it's viewable, but I may have to go and get a new computer. So if I do, I do. I think it's really valuable to take advantage of the time left that we've got on this planet to get the word out to more people and serve the good of the game.
Well,
Thank you
we'll
very
hope
much,
that,
Ray.
yeah, and we'll hope that what, at my end, anyways, what I have experienced was plenty good.
It's great. Thanks very much, Ray. Take care. We'll chat with you in a while. Bye bye.
En avant les braves!
Bonjour.